Welcome to another edition of the Hawk Off the Press podcast. I'm your host, Gazette Hawkeyes reporter, John Steppe. I'm excited to welcome back to the podcast Tom Kakert from Hawkeye Report and On3. Tom, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, John. Always love doing this with you.
Yes. And we have some interesting recruiting news to talk about with the commitment of probably as highly of a touted 2025 recruit as Iowa's been pursuing, Iose Epenesa.
Yep.
This seems to be priority number one, seems to now have a check mark next to it.
Yeah, and this was a process this time. I go back to covering when AJ committed for the class of 2017, and he committed really early on in the process, and that was before NIL and everything. And it was just sort of an easy decision for them that he grew up wanting to play for Iowa, following his dad's footsteps, as most people know. His father, Epenesa, otherwise known as Repeat by Hayden Fry, he wanted to follow in dad's footsteps. And his brother, Eric, also followed in his footsteps. And Eric is still on the team. He's senior technically, but he has another year available, and I suspect he's going to be back. In fact, I think the Epenesas have basically said Eric's going to come back next year to be able to play at least one season with Yosa. And it's a great get. I go back to a story that I was at a Legends of Iowa football camp and Epi was there. Epenesa, we'll just call him Epi. He was there. Everyone calls him Epi. He was there, and he was there with AJ. And Yosa was there as a grade schooler, and I'll never forget him telling me. He goes, Tom, Yosa is bigger than AJ when AJ was that age. And I was like, okay, I guess we're going to be following him. So
now, however many years later.
Now, however many years ago that was probably, God, that was probably like 2016, maybe something like that, 2015. I don't know. I'm getting old. But it's been fun watching Yosa. And I remember when I think it was when AJ had committed or the draft or something. I don't know. I had called the Epenesas, and I remember they were kind of teasing Yosa that he's the next one that's going to get interviewed. Just he was the next one that gets all the gonna get all the attention. So it's fun. They're a great family, just awesome family.
Absolutely. And it seems like especially with Yosa, it seemed like everyone in the free world was practically trying to get him. So it seems like that kind of makes it even more impressive that he picks Iowa when his other officials were Penn State, Missouri, Utah, and Miami of Florida.
Yeah, and it was a different process, and it's because NIL is available to these prospects now, and so you've got an obligation almost to check things out. Maybe some other place was going to have more resources available to you than they would at Iowa. But here's the thing I always thought, and there were different times when it was like Miami and Utah and Iowa, or it was Mizzou and Iowa, or at the end, this last part, it was Penn State and Iowa. And when it was Penn State and Iowa, I kind of just felt like this is going to happen for Iowa because I just cannot see a member of the Epenesa family going to another Big Ten school. I couldn't fathom that. So I kind of knew that that's when this kind of thing was up. I could, there was a potential for him to go elsewhere, but I always just kept saying, I always think he's going to come back to Iowa because Iowa is special to them. It just is. It's, you talk to Epi about it, and it's just, he'll wax poetic about Hayden Fry taking a chance on a kid that was at Iowa Wesleyan and everything. And he is just, the University of Iowa means everything to that family. And if you know anything about the Samoan culture, the loyalty is such a huge thing in that culture. And Iowa matters to him. And I'll share this too. I ran into Epi and his daughter Sam at the bowl game this past year, and I was like, and Yose and his mom were at up on at a Bills game with to watch AJ, and and I asked him kind of where things were, and he's like, well, they've got all, it's got all these. He's got to narrow it down. He's just not really engaged with the recruiting thing. But he said AJ's in his ear all the time about going to play for Coach Bell and playing at Iowa. So AJ wanted him to go to Iowa. And I think that mattered in this as well. That his big brother, who he looks up to and idolizes, was telling him to go to Iowa. And then you saw some of the stuff with the official visit in June where AJ flew in for the official visit and surprised them. And boy, I that moment I saw that photo of all four of the jerseys with Epenesa on the back of them in a locker thing set up, I'm like, boy, if they don't get this kid now, they're never getting him, because that's the tug at the heartstrings right there.
And then it seems like kind of one thing that Epi mentioned to me back in June was that, the relationship between AJ and Kelvin Bell seems like it helps a lot when,
Well,
okay, same position coach too, that, AJ really likes and really believes in is me the guy who's me training Yose as well.
yes, huge deal. Just a huge deal. They have huge trust in KB, and KB is going to treat him right, and KB is going to get the most out of him and make him. It's like AJ was telling him, he's going to make you a pro. Go there where you're going to be made a pro. You're going to become a pro under Coach Bell. So um, that's what they did, and it's just, I'm sure it's just a big weight off the shoulders of Yose and the entire family. And now he can enjoy his senior year at Edwardsville and not have to worry about where he's going to go to college.
And then he kind of reminds me maybe of Aaron Graves in terms of a guy that, highly touted recruit. Of course, Aaron committed a lot earlier in his career, but
Yeah.
I could kind of see maybe him similarly having a, path to immediate playing time, kind of like what Aaron had.
Well, AJ did too. AJ played a lot his freshman year too. Had 4.5 sacks that season. Um, obviously didn't start early in his career, which was strange, but there were some veteran players ahead of him. But still very productive. And I could see, given the roster composition that I was going to have next year, I feel pretty strongly that Yose is going to be on the field next year. He just is. He might not start. Depends on what Ethan Herkett does next year, because he's, I think, got a potential COVID year that he could come back if he wanted to. But he may not want to come back. And then it's just, Max Llewellyn as kind of like and Brian Allen as defensive ends, but you got to have some depth there. So I could see him coming right in. I mean, he's built to play right now. He's 6'3", 6'4", 265. He's bigger. I mean, I think you probably saw him last fall when he was standing next to AJ on the sidelines, and he's bigger than AJ. He just is. AJ's kind of slimmed down since he was at Iowa, but he's a big kid, and he's got a chance to be pretty good. Is he going to be as good as his brother? Time will tell, but he's got the tools to be a very good impact player next year.
That has to be like Ray Braithwaite's dream.
Yeah.
With a guy who, is already this far ahead in terms of just physically being that close to being ready too.
Yeah. Ray's going to have a lot of fun with those. That you look at that this year's defensive line class, and then with Yose and like Fitzgibbon, who's coming in with Yose, and you look at like a Joseph Anderson, who's going to build up, Chineke, who's going to build up, and Drew Campbell, who's going to put some weight on and be pretty good, and so he's got and Devin Kennedy's already big. He's just going to fill him out more and make him a stud defensive tackle. It's really intriguing to look at the 24 class and then this 25 class with just these two guys about that for the future of Iowa football, because there's just some there's some fun toys there for Kelvin Bell to mess with and Ray Braithwaite to build.
And then 14 scholarship level guys. Of course, scholarship
Yep.
is kind of a funny term in the roster
Huh.
size, you know, versus scholarship limit world that we're gonna be living in. But 14 guys in this class plus having Fitzgerald there is the walk-on quarterback. It seems like I think On3 has Iowa's class somewhere in the 30s. Seems like
Yep.
there hasn't been a ton of national love for this class, but it seems like especially when they're gonna have to be cutting guys, bigger might not always be better for 2025.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing is that they're just gonna. It's so unsettled right now. I really kind of caution people to not get too wild about what the scholarship situation looks like because they're going to 105, but it's like Tyler Barnes talked about. They don't know what 105 is going to look like. Is it going to be 95 full and then you're going to kind of distribute the rest with partials or what's going to be available to you? Right now, we have them at with the addition of Epinesa and everybody coming back, and we know everybody won't be back because it's just impossible to keep everybody coming back in this day and age of college football. But they're at 84 of 85 scholarships. They've got 14 in this class, and that's why they're kind of ranked in the 30s. It's not a big class for them. So you have to wait and see what they add because I think what we're going to have to probably do as an industry is eventually kind of combine and wait to really rank classes and rank them in terms of high school recruiting class combined with your portal class, and that's going to give you your class. Even though they'll be graduating in different classes, I think that's probably something that the industry has to evolve to give a truer look at what kind of talent you're bringing in.
And kind of also in that formula, probably if it's possible, also what you're losing. Because I think
Yes.
a lot of people nationally, like I was doing a radio appearance in Columbus and they just kind of briefly looked at Iowa's portal numbers and they saw
Yeah.
not many guys added and they saw a bigger number of guys departing. And it's like, well, okay, but look at who you kept. And that changes it in terms of the quality
Especially
versus
for Iowa last year with the six COVID guys that came
yeah.
back. That just obviously that changes the entire complexion of this year's defense when
If you
you
don't
get
get all three of those linebackers back.
when you don't have Castro, Higgins, Jackson back, Jamari Harris back, um, Quinn Schulte back. It's a totally different team.
Even
Totally
Kyler
different.
Fisher too.
And Kyler Fisher, yes. It's a totally different team uh, for Iowa defensively. And now you've got, potentially a couple of All-Americans back and a guy who might end up being the all-time leading tackler in NCAA D1 history.
Yeah, when that's not necessarily even the best linebacker on this team. It's
Yes.
a pretty good position to be in.
Yes. It's just yeah, so that's the thing you have to look at as well is like COVID retention. Because those six guys are probably their six biggest recruits.
Yeah. And
You
that
know,
doesn't get factored into those rankings.
it doesn't get factored into recruiting rankings, but they had to recruit them. Now, some of it was swarm recruitment too. We'll be honest about it.
Mhm.
It's just that's how it works today. It's the same thing with how you land Iose Epenesa is you've got to have NIL availability, and some of that is discussed because it always is discussed.
And there'll be some retention opportunities, fewer guys with COVID years because this is kind of the
Yeah,
end of
there's just
that.
not. Yeah, there's just not many. I think there's only like four guys, and I don't think they think that any of those four, maybe one of them, like I mentioned, Herkett
Mhm.
might be a guy that could stay, but we'll see.
Yeah, and if you have a guy who has an NFL opportunity, it's a little harder to win that over, and a quality NFL opportunity. Those are the ones that are a little harder to win.
Yeah, it's hard, like for a Logan Jones or a Deontay Craig or somebody like that to come back again when you might have an NFL opportunity awaiting you. Not that some of these guys though did have them this year. I mean, I'm sure Nick and Jay could have gotten into and potentially gotten drafted and maybe certainly gotten to an NFL camp, but maybe gotten drafted. But I think they're both looking at bettering themselves from a draft perspective too. And hopefully they do. Hopefully both of them get a higher draft grade this year and are able to make it to the NFL.
Well, Tom, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, John.
Yeah, anytime. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Until next time, we will talk Hawks later.